You're listening to the Everything Went Black podcast.
Author Allison Gunn joins us this week on the podcast. Earlier this year, her debut novel, Nowhere, was released. And I've spoken about this book either here or on the Necromaniacs horror podcast. As I was completing the novel, I think I mentioned it. And some of you have actually read it and have gotten back to me about it. And it's a really, really great book, especially for a debut. And if you're into police procedurals, folky horror, and intense family drama, this definitely is for you. So she came on this week. We talked about the genesis of Nowhere, as well as her forthcoming novel, HIVE Mind, which is slated for a 2027 release. I'd like to thank everyone for listening. Definitely check out the other Horsemen of the Podcasting Apocalypse shows. Kicking everything off every other Monday, we've got Brandon Legion's Horror Wolf 666. Brandon and I are deep into our collaboration called The Black Lodge, where we talk about each episode of David Lynch's Twin Peaks. Up next in the rotation, we've got Into the Necrosphere by Jackie Smith, the greatest extreme music podcast in the land. Wednesday, of course, Everything Went Black comes to you, as well as Iblis Manifestations, brought to you by Cheyenne. Thursday is Necro Thursday, where the Necromaniacs horror podcast is released, as well as day one of Carl Hikara's Soul Knocks. Friday, Spitball Media comes at you, a irreverent pop culture show. Saturday is a day off. And in the Northern Hemisphere, we're enjoying summer. So, if you live up here, put on your sunscreen and, make sure you got your hydration in place. Sunday, Carl returns with day 2 of Soul Knocks. Carl and I are working hard, wrapping up our Darkness Weaves collaboration, where we discuss the work of Carl Edward Wagner. And we've also launched The Savage World of Robert E. Howard, where we get into as much of Howard's material as we can find. In addition to Conan, Robert E. Howard has, created many, many different characters, has worked in sword and sorcery, a genre which he helped create, as well as, historical adventures, boxing stories, westerns, horror. We're going to hit all that stuff. Thank you very much for listening. If you want to support the show further, please feel free to join the Patreon. For as little as $1 a month, you can support the show and get access to the bonus content. For $5 a month, you get access to the bonus content plus early access to the shows. For $25 a month, you get all that stuff plus a shout out on the show to promote your project, business, your own podcast, etc. Welcome to the show, Allison. And also, I'd like to congratulate you on Nowhere being such a fantastic debut novel.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah, I'm not exactly sure how I found out about your work. It may have been through one of the many BookTube channels that I listen to. And I think the way that they framed the narrative immediately grabbed me, because it was like, part folk horror, part police procedural, and I'm going to add this part myself, very, very intense family drama.
Yeah, that is an understatement. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's pretty much what the entire book hinges on, is that chaos between the family. Yeah.
But before we talk about the novel, I just want to ask you, prior to the publication of the novel, do you have any short stories or anything like that published, or did that show up in any?
No. So it's kind of a funny winding journey to actually publishing Nowhere. So I was trained as a historian. I have multiple degrees in it. Also a degree in library and information science. So I very much thought I would be more so operating in the nonfiction area. And I had works published in those fields. Also, I worked for the government for a long period of time. And as part of that, like those were my publications. I had always kind of doubted myself when it came to fiction to the point where like for whatever reason, had it in my head, like nobody wants to listen to this. Nobody wants to listen to what I have to say on this front, like what my inner thoughts are, so to speak. I had always been extremely creative. I mean, I've been writing since I was very, very young. It was always my therapy. I started in theater when I was 4. Briefly went to art school, specifically for film. But for whatever reason, by the time I got to my mid 20s, I had kind of given up on all of that.
Really?
Um,
Okay.
yeah, I did. And it wasn't until right before my 30th birthday, my best friend looked at me and was like, "Are you freaking kidding me? Like, what are you even doing at this point? This is stupid." Because I had written nowhere at that point, and she had started to read it. All the like feedback I was getting from beta readers and whatnot was very positive. So that's when I decided to just jump in and go full bore with it. So even though I had publishing credits, nowhere was really the first time that I was actively trying to publish something creative. And I went in a little bit blind, to be honest with you. So yeah, I mean, in short, like I have some short stories published now, but for the most part, I mean, my entrance onto the fiction scene was nowhere.
Wow. Yeah, that's I mean, normally, you talk to authors and they have all their short story publications and it's
Mhm.
like the demo for making the full length, you know what I mean? It's like
Yeah,
all these different exercises you go through and then boom, you do the novel. So I mean, that's a pretty huge undertaking. Are you an outliner or do you just like sit down and write?
that is such a fun question. I love it when people ask that because in the writing world, and you may know this already, but there's the idea of the planner, which is like a very intense outliner, lots of notes, and all of that. Then there's the pantster, which is like completely just going at it from the very beginning. And then there's like hybrid, which is a planster, where it's some mixture of the two. And honestly, I think most authors fall into that category, except for the ones who are like very much trying to follow things by the book. Um, so for me, I think I lean more towards what is now called, pantsing, but there is a degree of planning as well. With Nowhere, because I wasn't planning, I wasn't writing it for anybody else. I wasn't writing it because I wanted to publish it. It was something that, I felt like was needed to come out for me to be able to process things. Um, I did not have an outline of any kind. I mean, it was truly the kind of thing where I just sat down and I would have like beats in my head, but there was no official beat sheet. Certainly no storyboarding or anything of that nature.
Hmm.
It was just like I know eventually I want to get to this scene. So what happens in between this and this? And then just letting kind of the characters take the wheel, if you will, and following that along the way. Interestingly enough, when I went to write what is coming out next, which is Hive Mind, um, I had gotten it in my head that, like, well, if I want to do this the right way, the way that everybody tells me I'm supposed to be writing, I will outline everything. I'll know what I'm saying ahead of time. I will have all these backgrounds in place. It'll be absolutely perfect. I ended up rewriting Hive Mind 5 times. And on the fifth time, I said, like, to hell with this. Like I'm fucking over it. I'm done. No more of these ridiculous outlines and these notes that I can't keep track of anymore. I'm just gonna sit back and let the characters really drive this and follow that story through. So I've tried to be the planner. I tried to quote unquote do things right, as people would advise you to, and like fill out all the beat sheets perfectly. But ultimately, it's like if the characters aren't leading the story, then I get left behind. It's not just me. It is primarily the characters that make it shine.
So with that approach, like the original, like I imagine like your first draft is probably this like, monolithic, mass of material that you have to sort of chip away at to get into, the meat to make it flow in a narrative sort of sense, I guess, right?
I would say it's definitely more wordy.
Yeah.
So, one of the things that comes very natural to me, and it's probably partially because of a background in theater and film, is dialogue. Like, that's what I hear in my head. That's
Mhm.
what's coming out on the page very quickly. Um, that's what ends up having to be trimmed down in the final. So, the manuscript that I'm working on right now, which has not been sold to anybody. It's something that like is still very fresh out the oven, if you will. I think we were at 107,000 words when I finished, and then went back through and cut it down to like 97,000 words just off the bat, only looking at dialogue. That's truly, how lengthy my characters end up getting once they're in these back and forth exchanges, very quickly quipping. And like some of that works very well in a screenplay, but it doesn't necessarily work well in a novel.
Yeah.
People get like a little done with that when it's a constant back and forth. It's supposed to be pithy. So that's the area where I would say it's like chipping away and kind of bringing it back into something a little bit more refined. But I don't feel like it's overly inflated to the point where it's laborious to end up crafting it into what ends up in readers' hands. At least it hasn't been so far. God only knows what the next novel will bring.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that one too, actually, Hive Mind, which is coming out
Yeah,
next year,
I
right?
am very excited about Hive Mind.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that grabbed me right away um, was I mean, I love horror. That's like I'm a genre fan. I love,
Yeah.
all horror, like sword and sorcery, dark fantasy, all this stuff, science fiction. But when there's like there's almost like two schools of thought with me. There's like like the sort of like weird fiction, like Lovecraftian, where approach where it's really his stories have like no characters in them really. There's just
Mhm.
concepts, right? But then
Yeah.
there's like the more personable, character driven sort of work, which is really what you're all about. It's like it's
Mhm.
almost like the supernatural elements, though they drive the story forward, are almost like you're getting a slice of someone's life, and these supernatural elements just happen. They're there to punctuate, sort of
Mhm.
what's going on with the family. Because if you think about Rachel and Finn, they have this dysfunctional relationship, total chaos. And the chaos is like exacerbated by this supernatural force, which, you know, and then, without giving the story away, really sort of escalates everything that's already existing between the two of them, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's like, really, I mean, I see this as like a 4-part HBO miniseries.
That's what everybody says. And you know what? If HBO would make a move on that, I would be very happy. My film agent would be very happy.
No, I mean it has. I mean, maybe it's because of the dialogue too. It does have a very cinematic quality to it for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a lot of the feedback we've gotten. But as I'm sure you're aware, I mean, Hollywood is filmmaking just in general is something that's very chaotic, and you never know, when something's going to shake out and when it doesn't. You can be right at the finish line, and then that deal just goes south in a matter of 10 minutes. So,
So
yeah.
Dalmuth, is that an actual place or sort of like an aggregate of different towns?
Yeah, it's definitely kind of a code name for numerous different towns. But I mean, if I'm being more precise, so I was born in Lynchburg, Virginia, which is mentioned in the book, which is a little bit, probably about 45 minutes away from Roanoke, which is repeatedly mentioned in the
The
book.
lost colony.
Um, I mean, it's not that one, but yes, there's a lot of people associate the two together for sure, which, you know, uh, happy to talk about that more. But it's essentially the town where I was raised until I was about 4 or 5, which is when I moved to Lynchburg. Was there until I was 10. moved around all over the place. I moved 25 times. So it's like, again, it cannot help but be an aggregate of all of these different places, especially in Appalachia where I've lived. Um, so I mean, like things such as, there's a car accident in the book on a bridge over a river. Well, that's the river and the exact same place in Bedford, Virginia, where I was baptized. You know what I mean? Like there are very specific things about Dolmeth that are connected to Bedford, but also situationally, the way that the town is sort of structured socially, that integrates so many different places, both in the deep south and then all along the spine of Appalachia, which is primarily where my family moved. Um, it's not like it's just isolated to one area where you see these kinds of dynamics in a small town. So it definitely is like a hodgepodge, but cast into the actual landscape of that particular area. So again, like Lynchburg, Roanoke, Bedford, that kind of region.
One of the things that I was thinking about too is, we touched on the lost colony, in Roanoke,
Mhm.
uh, you
Yeah.
know, where like for anyone out there who most of the people who listen to this are in the know about stuff like this, but
Mhm.
what back in like the 1500s, I think there was like two attempts to settle Roanoke, and
So yeah,
yeah,
1587 was when the Roanoke colony was first established, and so that was a very small island off of the coast of North Carolina. And yeah, I mean, your listeners may already know, but the individual who founded that colony ended up having to return back to Europe, came back 3 years later, so 1590. And I think it was about 115 settlers had disappeared at that point. But yeah, I mean, that is specifically referring to the colony that was off of the coast of North Carolina. Roanoke, Virginia is actually in the Blue Ridge Mountains, but because it shares a name, there are so often references shared between the two. And I specifically reference Croatoa, which is like what was carved in on the trees on Roanoke Island, which happened to be the name of the local Native American tribe. That's specifically referenced in nowhere. And I don't feel like it's a spoiler to say, the town disappears, which is brought up right in the prologue, right up front. Nobody knows where they went. They went nowhere, right?
yeah.
Brunch. But in any case, there are parallels intentionally between what happens in nowhere and the lore of the Roanoke colony, for sure.
So Appalachia, that's a
Yeah.
large geographical swath of land that, I mean, what it goes from like Canada, like all the way down into like Mississippi, I think, right? Like proper Appalachia.
Yeah, if you're going by the Appalachian Regional Commission, which is the federal definition, yeah, it extends from like if you're being very generous, like a couple of counties in Mississippi all the way up into the northern portion of New York.
So
And
tech,
then if you're talking about like geologically, people will even sometimes argue that it goes underneath the Atlantic and pops up into the Scottish Highlands because
I haven't heard of
long,
that
long
one.
ago, they were actually connected.
Okay,
Yeah.
I dig that. I am
Yeah.
on that wavelength, man, because
Yeah.
that's so much of stuff I read about has to do with like Pangea and lost
Hmm.
continents and
Yeah.
all that stuff.
Yep.
Um,
It's technically the same range.
well, I mean, and also, I mean, this is another tangent though, but like, the appearance of certain structures, like pyramids and, all this other stuff in different geographical places kind of lend itself to that sort of dialogue, I guess. But anyway, that's another time, another conversation. But yeah, so but specifically when people think of like Appalachia, like they're thinking about like kind of West Virginia, Kentucky, like sort of region. And that has a very sort of rich folkloric history.
Hmm.
And this book seems to be touching on a lot of that stuff. And you mentioned that you were baptized, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I'm assuming that you've abandoned your Christian ways and become a heathen like the rest of us.
What would give you that impression?
Um, but so is that like some of the there's things that are inferred at in the novel, you
Hmm.
know, and so I mean, like I'm going to say it, the children, okay, where
Yeah.
they go and all this other stuff.
Hmm.
Now, does that come from any kind of like specific folk story, or is there some belief system that sort of surrounds that?
Yeah. So I mean, in answer briefly to your question, I'm actually a pastor's kid. I grew up the
Oh,
daughter
okay.
of a fundamentalist pastor. And so that's, yeah, we were in Bedford and Lynchburg specifically because of that. And that's why I got baptized in that river. So yeah, I mean, I was growing up in Appalachia, surrounded by a lot of interesting lore that was also somewhat connected to religion, which like specifically Christianity, which also gelled with Irish, like Celtic folklore as well.
Right.
And the more I dug into that, just out of pure curiosity as I grew up and like embraced my weirdness and that, I realized just how much there was shared in these sort of folkloric patterns between Celtic lore and Appalachian lore, particularly in central Appalachia. So, like you said, West Virginia, Kentucky, Tennessee, portions of Virginia, North Carolina, like that kind of area. Um, so when I went to start writing Nowhere, it was almost effortless to conjure up these ideas of like the Fae lore, really, that undergirds the entire story. That's something that I kind of freaked out about a lot when I was a kid, and it is intimately connected to Christianity and those systems of belief, but it spans both, again, like Europe, the Celtic areas in particular, as well as Central Appalachia. It's something that's shared, fused, really mingles together with that religiosity and comes up as like kind of a firebrand. You know what I mean? Because you can blame so many things on like devil children in the woods, right? Or like somebody being exchanged for someone else. I don't think it's terribly much of a spoiler to say there's a little bit of a changeling aspect to the novel as well. So all of those things combined together kind of creates the perfect um, spark, I think, for paranoia to be raised in a religious community because you're going, oh, is it something demonic? Is it what's wrong with this kid? You know what I mean? Like, um, what is happening to them? Is it something supernatural in terms of like folklore or ghosts, or surely this is Satan? You know what I mean? Like, folklore allows you to play with those ideas so much, but it also unites and threads through all these different kinds of themes, which is why I think it's so cool to see Central Appalachian lore sort of radiating into everything else. But I'll say, in addition to Celtic and Central Appalachian folklore related to Fae, Black-Eyed Kids did definitely influence a little bit of that as well. I'm a sucker for creepy pastas.
Oh yeah, there's so many things that come out of that. It's funny originally when those like one page short stories, or not, sometimes they're less than a page, it would surface that kind of was like, I don't know about this stuff. But the deeper I got into it, man, it really, a lot of that stuff's like really compelling. And
Hmm.
there's been some like
Absolutely.
really iconic stuff like this, like Slender Man, the idea of Slender
Hmm.
Man, and
Yeah.
that I think that idea really took hold of me because the idea of like, you know, um, something that's manifested into reality from just the ether,
Hmm.
essentially, like,
Yeah.
you know,
From the collective consciousness.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's suddenly
I
it's
could
it's
go
real.
down many rabbit holes on that one. But yeah, I think that is fascinating. And I do think that's part of how folklore functions in our society. Is if enough of us believe something is true, it becomes part of our identity. It becomes part of the ether and potentially, maybe, is actually manifested in some sort of actual form. I don't know.
Well, that connects with like I'm a big believer in visualization. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
Like I
Yeah.
I believe in, meditating with intention on things,
Mhm.
like in a practical, like a practice way.
Yeah.
And if you do that, I, you know, I can name many things in my life that have come to me through that practice. And the idea of manifesting something from collective consciousness is almost like an extension of that. It's almost like each individual thinking a little bit about this thing every day of their life or spending hours on the internet looking at something and, visualizing what this person is. Because, speaking about Slender Man, there's all these different incarnations that appeared, and then suddenly horrible things happen.
Hmm.
And it's like, and this just connects to the whole idea of evil, as like this aspect of everyone, like I'm sure people that were into the Slender Man concept weren't bad people, or but there was some shade in their personality that was stimulated by this whole thing, and then something happens. So
Hmm.
yeah, I don't know. It's just a fascinating kind of mind experiment, I guess. I like thinking about things
For
like that.
sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, there's so much to explore on that front. What exactly we bring into existence simply by believing in it over and over and over and over again, and how our consciousnesses are connected somehow, some way. I'm very much the kind of person where I hesitate to say that I believe in anything, but like I think things. And actually, I don't know if you've ever heard of John E.L. Tenney, like he's a folklorist and kind of calls himself a professional weirdo, also connected to that in family. But he very much talks about how it's like it's okay to speculate. It's okay to say I don't know what the hell this is about, but it seems like this or that is happening. Part of the beauty of being human is that you don't know all the answers. And how lame would it be? How boring would this life be if we were able to explain every single thing? So yeah, I think folklore facilitates that kind of thought experiment too.
Yeah. Were there any the Fey folk, like from the Celtic mythology, or the Celtic system of folklore versus the Fey folk that appears in Appalachia. Are there any key differences between those, or are they essentially?
I would say that it's a more well-defined, coherent folklore in Celtic mythology. That being said, I mean, that is a function of Appalachia. Appalachia, especially during the 19th and the early 20th centuries, was filled with immigrants. You had all kinds of people coming off the boat and then immediately going to the mines because that's where they could actually find employment fairly easily. And so once they arrived, particularly in central Appalachia, you have those individuals from all over the world mixing their folklore together, also combined with, the Native American legends that already existed in the area. You had a lot of the freed slaves or the Black population that was fleeing slavery also starting to take to the mines as well, and they're bringing also their stories with them. So it becomes like this really fantastic, rich hodgepodge, all these different cultures starting to mingle their stories together. And so now, when you talk about Appalachian lore, it's so enmeshed that it's like, well, how do you say which is which? So, yeah, I think that the reason why it's easy for me to point to Celtic Fae lore and say that, yeah, that's what it's mostly based off of, but there's a translation there into Appalachia, is because it's like, well, that's a coherent one culture sort of take on that lore. And Appalachia, I mean, it can be taken all different kinds of ways, including even like modern lore, which talks more about like aliens
Ooh,
being
aliens.
part of Fae lore, which is a really fascinating rabbit hole to go down.
Yeah, in your the whole alien, um there's a couple different schools of thought that seem to have arisen with this alien stuff, and
Hmm.
I think it's come to it's entered the press recently, but it's actually an idea that I read about like about 15 years ago about how there's a belief that aliens are these like demonic entities as opposed to being from outer space, and there I mean there's all the way back to like um Jack Parsons, you know,
Mhm.
and his involvement with Thelema and
Mhm.
Aleister Crowley manifesting Lamb, LAM, who
Yeah.
coincidentally looked like an alien.
Mhm.
Suddenly, like the United States government is exploring these things in seriously. The whole Project Blue Book stuff was a real thing where they were taking this stuff like seriously, which
Mhm.
I find the fact that it was described in these like Christian terms of devils and demons, I think is like so limiting because if these let's for instance just assume that this is real, okay? I don't think
Mhm.
any kind of human projection of theology would apply to these things at all. They would just be what they are, these other worldly creatures that may or
Mhm.
may not exist in the same physical realm as us. Maybe they exist in the ether realm or something, and or a different
Right.
dimension, and they enter our realm through some sorcery or sorcery slash science that we haven't even discovered yet. So yeah, I
Mhm.
mean that's interesting. It's a fun, I take that stuff with a grain of salt, obviously, but like it's a fun read to read about these stuff.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I'm in the same sort of approach as you, where it's like, again, I don't exactly know what's going on. I know that there are so many people that talk about these kinds of encounters. I've never had one personally, which I'm actively mad about, to be real. Like, of all people, I do the creepiest stuff, and I still have yet to have some sort of alien experience that I know of. But I mean, you mentioned like that it didn't mesh necessarily with religiosity on a Christian basis. I don't know. Like my dad, at one point when I was a kid, suggested that potentially maybe they are angels. You know what I mean? Maybe that's where they're coming from. Because inherently, like if you're a fundamentalist Christian in particular, you're viewing everything as quite literal in the Bible, meaning that you would have to believe that like Jesus had also provided some means of salvation for others in the universe, right? Unless they were of some sort of divinity or either, demons. Like you said, they're using the terminology of devils and demons, and angels as well have been described as aliens. So you can make it compatible with that, or you can take the approach like you were talking about, where it's definitely something like interdimensional and potentially like we aren't even existing on the same plane. It's like brushing past one another. Who knows? Who knows? Or it could all be, I don't know, mass illusion. Who knows?
I I,
But
I
that's
would
what makes it kind of fun.
I would like to think though that there's the sort of I think I forgot which book in the Bible has the really creepy angels in it with like the multiple eyes and all that.
The
Uh,
seraphim.
the seraphim.
Daniel talks about it a bit. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's in a
I
couple of
would
different
I
places.
would like to believe that the seraphim are aliens actually from a different planet or
It'd be
universe.
interesting. Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's one of the interesting things about the Bible in general is it incorporates so much folklore from that culture, or well, a bunch of different cultures, really. This book was written over such a huge amount of time that you are seeing those bits and pieces. I think one of the things about folklore, regardless of the time period, that's so fascinating is trying to pinpoint where all these different cultures align. What are the stories that we're all talking about? Even if it's just slightly different, what are those moments in time? One thing right now that I think is fascinating that is like sort of in the urban legend space, but also I personally feel like urban legends are folklore in the making, is the Hat Man. You have reports of the Hat Man literally all over the globe.
I don't know who the Hat Man is.
What?
tell me. I
Really?
don't like. Yeah, I don't know
Okay,
who he is.
well, you've heard of shadow people, right?
Yeah. Okay. Shadow people I know about. Yes.
Yeah, so the Hat Man is kind of like a version of shadow people, but he allegedly has, this broad-rimmed hat that he wears, so you can see that shape and the outline of it as part of the silhouette. Most people describe some feeling of like dread or like an ominous sort of presence with it. Some people have associated it with sleep paralysis, things of that nature, but it is so specific to have this kind of a hat that is described over and over and over again across the globe. So what are we all picking up on there? That's very clearly some kind of archetype, as Carl Jung would describe.
Hmm.
What, that's all of folklore, right? Like folklore is the business of collecting stories and telling the human narrative via fiction, but also collecting our archetypes and embodying those, you know, for
Yeah.
future generations.
I got to research the Hat Man though. Definitely.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
I'm shocked you don't know about the
Well,
Hat
I
Man.
know that the shadow people, how it relates to sleep paralysis, and
Hmm.
people side
Yeah.
the hat. It's I'm a little
Yeah, look
embarrassed. I
up
don't know
the
who he
Hat
is.
Man. He's a creepy fellow.
Did you All right, so your course of study was history and like librarian and all this stuff. So
Mhm.
what was it about horror? Did you read horror? Were you a big horror fan? Like, out of nowhere, you wrote a horror novel? Like,
No,
what was the
no.
lead up to that?
Um, so when I was a kid, I was scared of literally everything. As I said, I was the pastor's kid in an evangelical world. We were very much obsessed with the end times. And so sort of like apocalyptic narratives were a part of my personal everyday. Like I thought the end of the world was coming at any moment. That's the way that I was trained to believe, right? Um, so that right off the bat kind of sends you down some morbid thoughts on a routine basis from the time you were very, very young. Um, but that being said, I mean, I was so petrified of everything as a child that just the like theme song for Unsolved Mysteries would send me running to my bedroom, like crying. Like I could not handle that kind of stuff on top of sort of this like apocalyptic nonsense that was already drilled into my brain. It wasn't until I had a very like traumatic moment in my early teens that everything kind of seemed to switch. My older sister, she already loved horror. It was something that she watched on a routine basis. And I remember she had rented Scream and put it on at home. And I came out of my bedroom, again, following this trauma, and was like, I'm going to sit here. I'm going to watch this. I'm just going to see what Jamie enjoys about this. And the longer I sat there, it was like, did I get the shit scared out of me? Absolutely. But there was something really empowering about being able to sit there in a controlled atmosphere and process the fear that came along with what I was experiencing in a, again, safe, controlled atmosphere. And I could get up and I could walk out anytime if I wanted to. So writing horror naturally became the next step because it's like, well, now I'm the one that's actually controlling that narrative. And over time, like that is truly the genre that allows me to talk about things that are very personal and that are things that I don't even know how to understand or communicate, express to anybody until after it's kind of been filtered through this. So yeah, I mean, at this point, like that's just the natural way that I tell stories. There is a wide berth of different kinds of horror that I've written. Um, but for now, a lot of what I'm wanting to get out into the world does have to do with sort of like folk horror and folkloric aspects as well. In short, yeah, horror just always made sense in terms of my own neuroses and processing trauma, for sure.
Did you read a lot of horror, or did you have any authors that were influenced by, or even that you were into at all?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, so funny enough, um, this sounds so counterintuitive to the culture in which I grew up. My dad wasn't always an evangelical Christian. At one point, he was in the Navy, and when he was in the Navy, he was a huge fan of Stephen King. And so, again, coinciding with this kind of like traumatic experience that I had, and my sister kind of like continually like feeding me horror and having that experience. I had asked, like, hey, can I like start to rent more horror books and stuff at the library? And my dad handed me The Shining.
Oh wow, that's a good one to start with. Damn,
Yeah.
that's like jumping into
I
the
even
deep end.
even remember like standing in the checkout line, getting ready for them to process the book. And my mom was like, are you sure this is okay, Jay? Oh yeah, it's fine. That's totally fine. So I do think like, I would be remiss if I didn't say like Stephen King is truly the foundation of when I started writing horror.
I think
That being said,
everyone likes Stephen King on some
right,
level, definitely. Yeah. Just
exactly. It's you can't get away from it, right?
yeah.
Um, but I would also point to, again, this is like another great great grandfather of horror. Like you can't get away from Edgar Allan Poe. Like
Well,
he
yeah.
was a
Gothic.
huge
Yeah.
influence on me as well.
Yeah.
Um, but there are so many incredible authors that pop up all the time around all of us. So, I mean, Josh Mallerman, that man is going to go down in history as one of the greatest horror authors of our period. I have no doubt. So he's, fed into my present work. T Kingfisher, she's stunning. Like, but it's everywhere you look. There's just horror creativity flourishing all around us. So it's like, yeah, I have these old school influences that really pushed me closer and closer towards, starting out on my journey. But all along the way, we have amazing voices everywhere that you look. So yeah, there are too many to list, in other words.
Being someone who is operating sort of in the Appalachian realm, are you familiar with Carl Edward Wagner? Do you know who that is? He's
I'm not,
he's
no.
he passed in the 90s, and he
Hmm.
doesn't really, for a guy that has influenced a lot of people, he doesn't have a very large body of work, but he wrote a lot of books, a lot of well, mostly short. Actually, all of his horror fiction is short stories, and they're several of them are based in the same, Kentucky, but the Appalachian, area. And
Hmm.
he kind of mines that same, like a very similar sort of ground that some of your work does. It's not as it's I wouldn't say it's not as relationship, you know, based. It's
Hmm.
more like story based. Actually, my cat is
I know, I see
the
the
other cat.
kitty.
Yeah. So just for the record, uh, my wife Tina, who just popped in real quick, was the one who urged me to read Nowhere, because we were seeing it show up on a lot of these different channels, and then she's the one who urged me to read the novel, and she read it before I
And
did.
she's clearly a wise, wise woman.
Yeah.
So
So yeah, but we're both on board for the whole experience here, so that's good.
nice.
Yeah. Yeah. So I was telling about Wagner. He's mostly known for like a sword and sorcery character that he wrote called Cain. But Valancourt Books released a collection of his short stories. That's the only stuff that's currently in print right now by him, and it collects a bunch of his, material that was been lost, And there's at least 4 or 5 stories that take place in, that are in the, Appalachia, and sort of the
Hmm.
same kind of, folksy influences and things like that.
What period of time was he writing in?
The 70s into the 80s.
Oh,
Um,
I'm gonna have to look him up. Yeah,
well,
sounds
are you
awesome.
familiar with Valancourt Books? They're
Yeah. Hmm.
okay. I mean their whole business is keeping these guys in print, and they
Yeah.
they I think it was 2 years ago they
Mhm.
published. It's a collection called In a Lonely Place, and it's got all the hits,
All right.
all of his short stories that actually it's
Awesome.
one of the things that a lot of people I think it's a little bit of a disservice to you actually is they mention True Detective in
Hmm.
when they try to describe Nowhere, right? And it's
Hmm.
like I love True Detective, it's great. I dig all the weird fiction stuff from the first season. Probably one of my
Hmm.
favorite shows, Thomas Ligotti references, but some of the
Yes.
Wagner stuff, Wagner actually was an influence on Nick Pizzolatto, who wrote it. With some,
Really?
oh yeah, yeah, definitely. It's like Wagner, Thomas Ligotti with the whole like Carcosa, Yellow King, like all that sort of stuff, and like
Hmm.
Lovecraft were like big
Well,
influences.
yeah, I knew the Lovecraftian aspect.
Yeah,
Yeah. No, I'm gonna have to look this up. That's amazing. Thank you.
yeah,
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 I'm
definitely.
surprised because I currently I'm getting yet another very expensive piece of paper in the form of a master's degree in Appalachian Studies
Oh wow.
at Shepherd University, and my focus is folklore. So I'm shocked that like nobody's pointed me in Wagner's direction. That's awesome. Thank you.
He's sadly someone who um he's kind of like obscure in a way that is not cool. You know what I mean? It's like some people are
Hmm.
like, oh yeah, I like this obscure stuff that everyone knows about though, but it's still kind of
Yeah.
outside. But he just none of his work is in print except for that stuff that Valancourt put out. And I mean
Yeah.
he, his sword and sorcery stuff is like, equally could be is equally as good as like, Robert E. Howard and all this other stuff.
Hmm.
But anyway, yeah, yeah, I highly
Yeah.
recommend checking that out.
Fascinating. Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah. So Hive Mind, which is coming out next
Yeah.
year. Okay, can you
Hmm.
give us a little preview on that, possibly? Like what?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, Hive Mind is something I'm so incredibly excited to share with everybody because it did come out of a place that like as I talked about a little bit in my author's note with Nowhere, and I think it's probably evident in Nowhere just in general, is that, you know, the experience I had with religiosity was one that was very oppressive and very much, having to edit who you are as a human being. Hive Mind deals with the patriarchal aspect of that and the implications that it had on my life personally, where it allowed for so much abuse in different forms to come into my life. Um, and the ability to start processing that was one that freed me to start letting loose this incredible rage. So, right after Nowhere, I had written a completely different novel, two different novels actually. And the one my agent and I were shaping to get ready to take to Atria, which is my current publisher. And I stopped her midway through and I was like, I I understand. Like I like this book. I know we want to take it forward, but I'm not into it completely right now. Like my brain is in a different place. I'm really mad. And I need to know what to do with it. I need a moment to kind of process where I'm at. Can we pause? And right after that was where Hive Mind just like came all the way out. It was a moment where I let go, especially on that fifth version, and just let myself rage. So it contains so much of my own um, ire and rage against this patriarchal system in which, I mean, generally in the United States we're living in anyways, but especially within these very strict religious communities, like I think a lot of people will be able to relate to that aspect. And it also really heavily, even more so than Nowhere, relies on Appalachian folklore to an extent that I think people who love old gods of Appalachia, they're really going to appreciate that. Um, so that's kind of like the background of how Hive Mind came into existence. But the basic premise of Hive Mind is that there is this sort of gothic scream queen influencer, whose husband is also her manager, and he is just pushing, 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 pushing. Has been doing it for years. Everybody knows that they have a very strained relationship, but nobody's saying anything because he brings in the cash. You know what I mean? Like they make the magic happen. But then one day, Jacob, who is the husband slash manager, wakes up in an abandoned cabin and he rolls over, and B Torrance, who is the stream queen, if you will, she has been absolutely brutalized and is laying dead next to him. There's no denying that he was in some way involved in her murder. Like the evidence is incontrovertible. Like there's no denying it whatsoever. But Jacob cannot remember an entire week of time.
Oh,
He has
wow.
no idea what happened to his wife to be or any of that. And the best that he has to go off of are these really twisted, warped visions that he begins experiencing. He starts saying, that the devil was involved and there are demons, and that also his wife is speaking to him from beyond the grave, and very quickly begins to descend into a psychotic state. And in order to do damage control, his sister, who is a Hollywood executive, ends up hiring these two very different journalists to come aboard and try to spin the story, try to paint B Torrance as this living nightmare so that it'll make it look more understandable whatever Jacob actually did do. Even if that's like he drove or he went off, a cliff into insanity. Well, it's because of B. She really caused it, no matter what the case may be.
Mm.
But the further these two journalists dig and try to figure out how to spin the story, and yes, eventually what did really happen, the more they find out, like, oh, nothing about what happened to her makes sense. And she in no way was who she claimed that she was, and pretty much no one else around her was exactly who they say that they were. So yeah, it's a very winding story that is bloody. It is filled with vengeance, but it's also overflowing with Appalachian folklore to an extent that I had not had the ability to play around with until very recently. Once I started really just digging in to our lore here, our regional lore.
Well, the first thing that jumps out to me is that this book is coming out in 2027, right?
Mhm.
And I'm going to make a prediction right now that this is going to coincide with some sort of major news media event that has to do with
Hmm.
you know, misdeeds by the patriarchy.
Oh my goodness. I mean, those are quite frequent, but I mean, if it's the one I'm thinking of, then that
Oh,
would
there's
be
a couple
really
that are
interesting.
there's a couple that are at least a few that are in the headlines right now.
It's true.
Yeah.
Yes.
And
Yeah. I mean, I think it is the right time for this kind of a novel.
yeah, no, it's
But women being enraged is kind of like leading horror right now. Like messy, angry women. Um, those are the characters that are really starting to take forefront, and I could not be happier about that.
no, that's awesome.
High
Yeah, no, I'm
time.
a fan. I'm on board, man. It's great,
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that. I'm also looking forward to getting out of 2026 too, for many reasons.
Yeah. But we've been saying that since like 2020,
Oh, this is
and
true. This is true.
we should be careful what we ask for.
Yeah, yeah, that's also a good point, you know. Um, yeah, but Allison, thank you very much for joining us on this. And like I said, I enjoyed Nowhere. We both, my wife and I, enjoyed it. I've been some of the listeners have dipped into the novel as well. I do another podcast called Necromaniacs, which is
Mhm.
a film. We talk about films, and I mentioned it on there. Actually, I mentioned it on there right after I finished reading it, and we have a caller line, and someone called in and was like, "Oh yeah, check that out." And then also on the Everything Went Black Patreon, we've got like a little community that exists around the podcast of, you know, there's the Patreon version of these episodes, which they come out earlier than, the
Hmm.
scheduled. And then I have extra content that I put on there. And then every now and then we have these hangouts where we get, a Zoom call together and we all talk and message each other and
Nice.
everything. So some of those
Yeah.
guys have checked it out too
Well,
under,
that's awesome. Thank
yeah,
you to everybody who's listening, who's checked it out. That's amazing. And I hope you
yeah.
enjoy Hive Mind too.
No, it sounds great, and it's good because like the folklore stuff drags me in for sure. Um, I like very atmospheric sort of stuff. I'm not really into like extreme horror, or the gross out
Right.
material. That's not really my bag. But
Hmm.
anything that tells a story, I guess like storytelling is always the first and foremost thing. And if there's like a personal element to it, that
Yeah.
has to do with drama between people, you know,
Hmm.
and then the horror elements come in to kind of lace everything together. That's what I really enjoy, And it's
Right.
funny you mentioned Stephen King earlier as like, I mean, he come on, I know he's like the Coca-Cola of like horror,
Yeah,
novels, but
exactly.
everyone likes a nice ice cold Coca-Cola every now and then. And I am a
Yes.
massive fan. I have nothing but respect for Stephen King. I totally respect his hustle. Does
Hmm.
he know, is his endings the best? Maybe not. Does he end his
Not
novel?
always.
Not always.
Not
But
always. But you can't
he,
hit a home run every time.
true.
So,
But that's always been like what really has brought me back to the table with him is like there's so much like personality and like personal drama that enters into the equation with those books. So I mean, I guess that's, I've seen people compare some of your writing to that too as well. And I guess on that level, but it's different, you know what I mean?
mhm.
But yeah, I'm excited. Are you doing any kind of like book tours or anything like that, or have you done any of that stuff?
So we're still kind of cobbling together exactly what that's going to look like. I mean, we're pretty far out. But I mean, we've got a lot that's like tentatively planned up till now. So I mean, all of that stuff is obviously going to be available on my website, my social media, as soon as we start to hammer down what that's going to look like. It'll probably be more like January, February when we announce it.
Okay.
Just because people are going to be adding on to it all the way up until, the end of April and probably beyond that. So I will keep everyone abreast, I promise.
Yeah. So as far as like social media and websites and all that, how can people, find you online? Like what's the best places?
Yeah. So I think I'm probably most active on Instagram. So that's author Allison Gunn. Most places it's Gun and Pen, at Gun
Oh,
and Pen.
nice.
TikTok is where I also creep a lot. So, like I do post there, but I creep more than that. But you can definitely interact with me there. I am going to be actually tomorrow traveling up to Haunted Brewery and Hotel in Mount Joy, Pennsylvania.
Oh,
It's
okay.
called Booby's Brewery, and it's for an author slash like, it's a major horror book event called Haunt the Readers. This is the first year they're doing it, but it's massive. It's going to be really, really cool. But the reason I bring it up is because I'm going to be doing a lot of lives and some video journaling, vlogging, if you will, um, on my experience there because I will, at least on one of the nights, be staying in the entire brewery slash hotel by myself, which is like the best shining experience that I can possibly think of, but also I'm a little worried of what's going to turn up on the food. If
So
I don't post in 48 hours, somebody please like call a wellness check.
it sounds like the plot of a found footage horror film,
It
actually.
does.
I
Yeah,
might, I might
yeah.
have to, I
And
might
I
have to
am a
steal
sucker
that
for
idea.
found footage, so
I might have to steal the idea for a story or something.
I know, yeah. Well, if I don't come back from it, you're welcome to do so.
Are you a
But
craft beer fan? Do you like craft beers and stuff like that?
oh yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah, and I am that prototypical person who's like, oh, I love hazy IPAs. Like I couldn't get more millennial if I tried on that front. But yeah, I mean, I enjoy my craft brews as well as my bougie ass wine. So I
Same.
think what's really exciting is that the bar manager has decided to make multiple like signature beverages for various books that are there. So the one for Nowhere is called the Appalachian Smash. And that will have like gin and juniper and like all of these other things. But then there's the Rumble Bee for Hive Mind, which is like this really spicy honey, whiskey concoction. I can't give away all of like the recipe tidbits because that's like at the event, but I will share that online once they
Nice.
give me the go ahead. It's gonna be really cool for sure. There's lots of surprises that are
Yeah,
coming very soon.
we're also fans of bougie wines and special $9 cans of beer here in this house too.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, thank you very much for joining us. And
Thank you for having me.
yeah, no, it was great meeting you and best of luck with everything.
Thank you so much.